You know, sometimes in life, the deepest wounds don't come from enemies or strangers. They come from the very people you thought would protect you forever. And that's exactly what happened to me. So, let me introduce myself properly. My name is Silus Rowan. I'm 35 years old, and I work as a worldwide marketing consultant. That's a fancy way of saying that I travel around the globe, meet executives in skyscrapers, and design strategies for big companies who want to dominate their industries. On paper, it sounds glamorous, and in many ways, it is. But behind the polished resume, behind the frequent flyer miles, there's a story that still makes my chest tighten whenever I think about it. Because no matter how successful I became, there was always this gap. This wound, left behind by the very people I once trusted the most, my family. Let's rewind for a second. I grew up in Pasadena, California, in a middle-class household that, to anyone looking in from the outside, seemed completely ordinary. Picture this. A neat little house with a white picket fence, a minivan parked in the driveway, my dad dressed in his pressed shirt and tie as he headed to the bank where he worked, and my mom balancing her life as a freelance accountant. Neighbors probably thought, what a stable, decent family. But here's the truth. Stability on the outside doesn't mean fairness on the inside. I had a younger brother, Cassian, who was 4 years younger than me. And from the very beginning, it was obvious, painfully obvious, that Cassian was the golden child. He could do no wrong, he could fail a dozen times, and my parents would always swoop in to shield him. They made excuses, they defended him, they coddled him, as if the world owed him success, simply for existing. Me? I was the opposite. I was the one who had to grind. I worked 3 jobs at a time just to pay for school. I delivered packages in the mornings, waited tables in the evenings, and worked as an office assistant on weekends. Every dollar I saved went straight into my education. By the time I graduated, I was debt-free not because my parents helped me, but because I refused to drown the way Cassian always did. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. There were nights when I lay in bed, bone-tired, staring at the ceiling, wondering why I had to fight so hard while Cassian had everything handed to him. But back then, I told myself it was okay, because I believed in the long game. I believed that effort, perseverance, and sacrifice would pay off. And honestly, what kept me going more than anything was my grandfather, Thaddeus Rowan. Grandpa Thaddeus was, how do I put this? He was the anchor of my world. A big, strong man with rough, calloused hands from decades of construction work. His voice was deep, steady, and reassuring, like the sound of waves against a shore. But his heart was pure kindness. I remember sitting with him on warm Pasadena evenings, the two of us on the porch, drinking lemonade. He would tell me stories of his youth, how he started with nothing, how he worked under the blazing sun until his back ached, and how, slowly, brick by brick, he built a life worth living. And then, he'd lean closer and say words that carved themselves into me forever. Your strength is your true asset, Silas. Money, houses, cars, those things can come and go. They're tools. But your willpower? That's something no one can ever steal from you. Even now, I can still hear his voice echoing in my head. That single sentence became a lifeline for me. Every time I wanted to give up, every time I thought I couldn't keep pushing, I'd remember. My strength, my willpower that was untouchable. When I was 19, tragedy struck. Grandpa passed away. Losing him felt like losing the only person in the family who truly saw me, not just what I achieved, but who I was inside. But even in death, he left me with something powerful. He left me a trust fund. Now, I know when people hear trust fund, they imagine instant wealth, a silver spoon, endless luxury. But mine wasn't like that. Grandpa made sure there were conditions. He didn't believe in easy handouts, especially not for me, because he knew I didn't need them. The rules were clear. I could only access a portion of the trust when I turned 26. But only if I had proven myself to be responsible. The rest would come later, at 36. But only if I lived up to the values he had taught me. At 19, I didn't fully grasp what that meant. But later, I'd realize it was his way of protecting me, of guiding me even after he was gone. So, I worked. And worked. And worked. 7 years of long nights and early mornings. 7 years of climbing, rung after rung on the corporate ladder, while never forgetting where I came from. And by the time I turned 26, I had finally proven myself. That's when I used part of the trust for something that mattered more to me than any flashy car or fancy gadget. I bought a house, not just any house, a craftsman home in the Pasadena suburbs. To someone else, it might have looked old, outdated, maybe even run down. 1 story, wood siding, stained glass windows, a porch that needed sanding, and a backyard begging for care. But when I first walked through that creaky front door, I knew. This was it. This was my dream. It wasn't just a house. It was the physical proof of everything I had fought for. The years of sacrifice. The exhaustion. The determination, it all lived within those walls. And so, I poured myself into making it mine. I spent months sanding those wooden floors until they gleamed. I repainted every wall by hand, replaced cracked window panes, patched up the fireplace. And then, in the backyard, I created something that meant more than words could say. A rose garden. You see, my grandmother had loved roses. She adored them. So I planted a garden full of them, red and vibrant, in her memory. And every morning, when the sun rose and the scent of roses filled the air, I felt like she was still with me, smiling at me. That house wasn't just a roof over my head, it was a piece of my soul. But to my family, it was nothing but an eyesore. I remember one dinner where I invited them over, so excited to show them the progress I'd made. My mom looked around and wrinkled her nose. The kitchen's outdated, the walls are peeling. Honestly, Silas, this place is a waste of money. Cassian laughed, shaking his head. You're insane for putting money into this chicken coop. Why didn't you just buy a nice condo downtown? I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just smiled, because I knew they would never get it. They didn't understand that the value of that house wasn't in shiny new appliances or marble countertops. Its value was in the sweat, the tears, and the resilience it represented. But deep down, a part of me still felt the sting. Because no matter how hard I worked, no matter what I achieved, Cassian was always the one my parents praised. He was always full of potential, always just figuring things out, while I was the one who quietly carried the weight. And then came the opportunity that would change everything. I was offered a massive project, a 6-week consulting assignment in Europe, working between London and Frankfurt. It was the kind of project that could skyrocket my career, but it also meant I'd be away for a long time. 6 weeks, and that meant leaving my house empty. I didn't want that. That home was too precious to me. I wanted someone to at least check in on it, make sure the doors were locked, the garden was watered, the place didn't feel abandoned. So, I turned to the only people I thought I could trust. My parents. It seemed like such a small request. Just stop by a few times, I said. Check the locks, water the roses. That's all I'm asking. The night before I left, we had dinner together. I remember sliding the house key across the table to my father. And for a split second, something inside me tightened. I can't explain it fully, but it felt like I was handing over more than just a key. It felt like I was giving away a part of myself, a part of my soul, to people who had never truly valued it. At that moment, a whisper ran through my mind. This is a mistake. But I pushed it aside. Because they were my parents. My family. And surely, they wouldn't betray me, surely. The morning of my flight was filled with that mix of nerves and excitement you get before something big. I stood at the airport gate with my carry-on, checking my passport for the 10th time, pretending to be calm. But inside, my mind wasn't just on the project in Europe. It kept drifting back to my house, the wooden porch, the stained glass windows, the roses blooming in the backyard. That place wasn't just a home. It was the sum of my struggles, my victories, my history. And now it was sitting there in Pasadena, with its key sitting in my father's pocket. As the plane began to board, I tried to shake off the unease. They're my parents. They'll water the garden. They'll keep the place safe. I'm just overthinking. Still, a voice inside me whispered, Silas, you just handed over your heart to people who never valued it in the first place. I pushed the thought down and stepped onto the plane. London. A world away. When I landed in London, the city greeted me with gray skies and steady drizzle. The streets were alive with rushing commuters, black cabs, and the sharp sound of horns. For most people, that kind of chaos feels overwhelming. For me, it was electric. The project I was working on wasn't small, it was the kind of assignment consultants dream of. A global firm was launching a new product, and I was leading the team designing the marketing campaign. Every day was a whirlwind. Late-night meetings in high-rise offices, endless strategy sessions, frantic emails flying back and forth. And you know what? I loved it. This was the life I had built for myself, the one that no one handed to me. I was there because of the years I had spent grinding, the sacrifices I had made, the willpower that Grandpa Thaddeus had told me was my greatest asset. But at night, when I finally dragged myself back to my hotel room, collapsed on the stiff bed, and stared at the ceiling, my mind always drifted back home. To Pasadena. To my craftsman house. To that rose garden I had planted with my grandmother in mind. I would close my eyes and picture it. The soft California sunlight warming the petals. The smell of roses filling the air. The wooden porch creaking under my footsteps. That image kept me grounded while the chaos of work tried to swallow me whole. Cassian's message. 3 weeks into the project, just when I was starting to feel like I could handle everything, My phone buzzed. It was a message from Cassian. No, hey, how are you? No, hope you're doing well. Just a link. Curious, I tapped it open, and my heart stopped. It was a link to his Instagram post. Cassian was standing on a pristine white beach, turquoise waves glittering behind him. He wore a linen shirt, sunglasses perched on his nose, smiling like he didn't have a single worry in the world. The caption read, "Paradise found. Need more days like this." The location tag? Maldives. I sat there in my freezing London hotel room, staring at the screen, my chest tightening. How? Cassian didn't have a job. He had maxed out credit cards. He'd been whining for years about how the system didn't understand him. My parents weren't rich, so how the hell was he in the Maldives, staying in a bungalow with an infinity pool, sipping cocktails, living the kind of vacation people save for years to afford? I sent him a quick reply. Looks nice. Who are you there with? No response. I called my mother. No answer. I called my father. After a few rings, it went to voicemail. That's when the unease I'd been burying deep down began to rise, spreading through my chest like a cold fire. Something was wrong. Very, very wrong. The posts keep coming. Over the next week, while I tried to stay focused on presentations and client meetings, Cassian's Instagram posts haunted me. One day, it was a photo of him on a yacht, a smug grin on his face as he raised a glass of champagne. The next day, it was him in a luxury restaurant, exotic seafood laid out in front of him. Another day, him leaning against a sparkling new SUV with the caption, "Welcome to the new ride." Each post hit me like a punch in the gut. Cassian didn't earn this. He didn't save, he didn't hustle, he didn't grind. And yet there he was, flaunting a lifestyle I knew damn well he couldn't afford. Meanwhile, my parents, when they did pick up the phone, sounded evasive. "Silas, everything's fine," my mom said once, her voice unnaturally tight. "Don't worry about the house, just focus on your project." My dad was even briefer. "I'm busy. We'll talk later." Every word only deepened the pit in my stomach. Success. Tainted by dread. By the time the 6 weeks were over, my project in Europe was a huge success. Executives shook my hand, praised my strategies, promised promotions when I returned to the States. It should have been one of the proudest moments of my career, but instead, all I could think about was Cassian, the Maldives, the SUV, my parents' strange evasiveness. The entire flight back to Los Angeles, I stared out the window, watching clouds drift by, my chest heavy. I kept telling myself, "It's fine, I'm overthinking. When I get home, everything will be okay." But another voice whispered, louder this time, "Silas, brace yourself. Something's waiting for you." The first sign. When I landed at LAX, the California sun was shining bright and warm, but for me, it felt like ice. I grabbed a taxi straight to my parents' house in Pasadena, because that's where my house key was supposed to be. As the cab pulled up to the familiar little house with the white picket fence, I noticed something that made my chest clench. Parked in the driveway was a brand new car. Sleek, shiny. The kind of vehicle that cost far more than my parents could ever justify spending. And right then, deep down, I knew something had happened. Something I wasn't ready to hear. When my dad opened the front door, it felt like stepping into a storm. He didn't smile. He didn't even look surprised to see me. His voice was flat, almost cold. "Come in, Silas. We need to talk." That was the moment my stomach dropped. I knew, instinctively, that whatever he was about to say wasn't good. I stepped inside, dragging my luggage behind me, the air heavy and suffocating. My mom was sitting at the dining table, her hands clasped tightly together, eyes fixed on the floor like she couldn't bring herself to look at me. Cassian wasn't there, but his shadow was everywhere. I could feel it in the silence, in the tension, in the way my mother's shoulders shook just slightly, as if she was holding back tears. I set my bag down slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where's my house key, Dad?" For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, my mom finally lifted her head, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Silas, your house. We sold it." The words didn't make sense at first. It was like she had spoken in another language. My ears were ringing, my brain refusing to process what I had just heard. "Sold?" I repeated, my voice barely audible. You sold my house? What do you mean you sold it?" My father's jaw tightened as he crossed his arms. His tone was firm, almost defensive, like he'd already rehearsed this conversation. "We needed the money, Silas. Cassian needed a fresh start. He deserved a chance to enjoy himself. And I needed a new car." I stared at him, my chest burning, my pulse hammering in my ears. "You sold my house." My voice cracked. "The house I spent years working for. The house I poured every drop of sweat into. You sold it for a vacation and a car?" My mom flinched, her eyes darting away, while my father simply shrugged, as if it was obvious, As if I was overreacting. You're always fine, Silus. You've got a good job, plenty of money. You'll bounce back. But Cassian? He's struggling. He needs us. Struggling? I snapped. My voice finally breaking free of the restraint I'd been holding. Cassian is 30 years old. He hasn't held a job for more than 6 months in his entire life. And you're still treating him like a child while taking everything I've built for myself. I turned to my mother, desperate for her to step in. For her to at least show regret. To be the voice of reason. But all she said, in a whisper that cut like glass, was, "You don't understand, Silus." Cassian was stressed. He needed a vacation to recharge. A bitter laugh escaped my throat, one I couldn't control. A vacation? He needed a vacation? To the Maldives? At a 5-star resort with his girlfriend and friends? You sold my home for that. I reached out and grabbed my mother's hand, searching her face for some kind of denial, some sign that this was a mistake. That I'd wake up and realize it wasn't real, but her eyes, those trembling, guilty eyes, told me everything. It was true. The house I had bought with my blood, sweat, and tears. The home I had built with my own hands. The garden I had planted in honor of my grandmother, it was gone. The final straw. My father walked over to a drawer, opened it, and pulled out a small stack of crumpled banknotes. He dropped them on the table with a dull thud. "This is what's left," he said flatly. After we sold the house, I looked at the money, then back at him, and something inside me snapped. That was it. That was the price of my dream? A stack of wrinkled bills thrown on a table like spare change? I couldn't breathe. I couldn't stay. Without another word, I stormed out, leaving the key and the money behind, facing the truth. But as much as I wanted to run, I couldn't resist one thing. I had to see my house. I took a taxi across Pasadena, every mile heavier than the last, until finally the car pulled up in front of my Craftsman home. Except, it wasn't mine anymore. The stained glass windows were still there, but the drapes were different. The rose garden looked off, trimmed in a way I never would have done it. And in the yard, there was an elderly couple watering plants. I stepped out, my throat dry, my heart pounding. The woman looked up, saw me, and smiled kindly. "Hello, can I help you?" I swallowed hard, my voice shaking as I said, This was my house. My name's Silus. I used to live here." The man set down his watering can, staring at me with surprise. "Wait, you're Silus Rowan? We bought this place a month ago. From your parents. They said you'd moved abroad permanently." I felt the ground tilt beneath me. Not only had my parents sold my house, they'd lied to the buyers too, spinning a story to cover up what they'd done. I mumbled something, I don't even remember what, before stumbling back into the taxi. My chest was tight, my vision blurry. The betrayal was complete. A lifeline. I didn't know where else to go, so I called the only person I trusted. My best friend from college, Orion. He had become a lawyer, sharp and determined. The kind of guy you could rely on when everything was falling apart. We met at a coffee shop. I sat across from him, hands trembling, and spilled everything: Cassian's Maldives trip, the SUV, my parents' new car, the lie to the buyers, and most of all, the house that was no longer mine. Every word felt like a knife. Orion listened quietly, his brow furrowed, his fingers drumming the table as he pieced it all together. When I finished, he leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "Silus, you mentioned something earlier. You used your grandfather's trust fund to buy that house, right?" I nodded. "Yeah. Part of it." A spark lit up in Orion's eyes. "Then this isn't just about your parents betraying you. That house might still legally belong to the trust. And if that's the case, selling it without your consent? That could be illegal." For the first time in days, hope flickered inside me. I sat in that coffee shop across from Orion, my hands shaking around a half-empty cup of black coffee that had long gone cold. I had just poured out the most humiliating, heartbreaking story of my life. And for the first time since stepping off that plane from Europe, I felt like maybe, just maybe, someone was on my side. Orion leaned back, thinking, his lawyer's mind working through the mess like a chess player scanning the board. "Silus," he said carefully, "you need to remember something. Your grandfather didn't just leave you that trust fund for money. He left it with rules. And if you used even part of it to buy that house, then technically," he paused for effect, locking eyes with me, "that house might not have been yours to sell in the first place. It belongs to the trust. And you, my friend, are the trustee. Like same given and seizes." His words hit me like a jolt of lightning. All those years ago, I'd thought of the trust as simply financial help. Something Grandpa had left to give me a leg up. I hadn't thought of the technicalities, the legal boundaries wrapped around it like invisible wires. I leaned forward, my voice tight. "So you're saying, if my parents sold the house without my permission?" Orion nodded slowly. "Then it wasn't just betrayal, Silus. It was fraud, maybe even forgery. And depending on the terms of that trust, there could be consequences far bigger than they realize. My chest was tight, my mind racing. I remembered sitting with Grandpa on the porch, his deep voice saying, "Your strength is your true asset." I remembered him telling me that the trust was meant to protect the future. Had he known? Had he foreseen something like this happening? The name that brought hope. Orion tapped the table with 2 fingers. "Who managed your grandfather's trust again? You had a lawyer back then, right?" "Yes," I said, the name surfacing in my memory like an anchor from the deep. "Mr. Lysander. He's the one who explained everything when I was 25. He allowed me to access the portion I used for the house." Orion's eyes lit up. "Then that's your next step. Call him. Set up a meeting. Tell him everything. If anyone can unravel this, it's him." I hesitated. My stomach churned at the thought of laying it all bare to some lawyer, of dragging my parents through legal mud. This was my family we were talking about, the people who had raised me, as flawed as they were. But then I pictured the rose garden I had planted for my grandmother, now trampled under strangers' footsteps. I pictured the smug grin on Cassian's face in those Maldives photos. No. Family or not, they had crossed a line. "I'll call him," I said firmly, more to myself than to Orion. The office of Mr. Lysander. The next morning, I found myself standing outside a quiet office building in downtown Pasadena. The kind of place where the walls smelled faintly of old wood and paper, where time seemed to move slower. The sign on the door read, "Lysander and Associates, Estate Law." When I stepped inside, the scent of leather and polished oak filled the air. Behind a large desk sat Mr. Lysander himself, just as I remembered him. White hair neatly combed, round glasses perched on his nose, and an aura of calm authority that reminded me of someone out of a classic novel. "Silas," he said warmly, standing to shake my hand. "It's been a long time. Sit down. Tell me what brings you here." "It is an Adival too." I sat, every nerve in my body screaming as I began to recount the entire nightmare. I told him about Europe, the Maldives photos, the new cars, my parents' cold confession, the elderly couple now living in my craftsman house. When I finished, my voice cracked on the last word. I expected shock, or maybe pity. But Mr. Lysander only nodded slowly, steepling his fingers under his chin. "Silas," he said, his voice calm but heavy, "that house wasn't just your personal property. It was purchased using funds from the trust. Which means it is, by definition, a trust asset. And as the trustee until you reach 35, you are the only one authorized to make decisions about it." My heart pounded. "So what does that mean?" Mr. Lysander leaned back, pulled open a drawer, and set a thick leather-bound folder on the desk. Stamped on the cover were the words, "The Thaddeus Rowan Trust." He flipped it open, ran his finger down a page, and pointed to a highlighted section. "Your grandfather was very precise. He included what's called a forfeiture clause." I leaned forward, breath caught in my throat. "It states," he continued, reading carefully, "that any beneficiary who misappropriates, forges, or attempts to sell trust assets without the trustee's consent will immediately forfeit their entire inheritance. Not a portion, not a penalty. Everything, gone. We haven't to a probably to enter tear." The room went silent except for the pounding of my heart, the weight of justice. I sat frozen, staring at the words as if they were glowing on the page. My parents, Cassian. They had just sold a trust asset without my permission. They had forged signatures, lied to buyers, pocketed money. By doing so, they had unknowingly destroyed their own inheritance. Each of them was set to receive hundreds of thousands when I turned 36. "All of it gone," I whispered, my voice trembling between grief and a strange rising fire. "So you're saying, if I can prove they forged the sale?" Mr. Lysander looked me dead in the eye. "Then not only can we take legal action to recover the house, but the forfeiture clause activates. Your parents and your brother will lose their shares of the trust. Permanently." It felt like the ground shifted beneath me. On one hand, there was rage, justice, even. They had taken everything from me, and this was the way the universe balanced the scales. On the other hand, it was my family. My parents. My brother. Was I really ready to destroy them? Mr. Lysander must have seen the conflict in my face, because his tone softened. "Silas, this won't be easy. This isn't just about law. This is about blood. You need to decide if you're strong enough to follow this through." They're prying to grassing. I thought of Grandpa again. His voice, his words. "Your strength is your true asset." And for the first time since my world had fallen apart, I felt a spark inside me. A determination. I clenched my fists, met Mr. Lysander's steady gaze and said, "I'll do it. I'll fight." They thought they could steal everything from me and walk away. They were wrong. When I walked out of Mr. Lysander's office that day, Pasadena's sun was blazing. But inside me there was only storm. For weeks, I had been drowning in grief, disbelief, and betrayal. But now I had a target. A mission. Something solid to cling to. They thought they had stolen everything from me. But what they didn't know was that my grandfather's trust was a fortress, and they had just set off every trap hidden inside. All I needed was proof. Returning to the scene, I knew exactly where I had to start. My house. Or what used to be my house. It wasn't mine on paper anymore. But in my heart? Every brick, every stained glass window, every rose bush still belonged to me. And if there were answers anywhere, they'd be there. So I went back. I stood at the front gate, fists clenched, staring at the rose garden that had once been my sanctuary. The flowers were trimmed unevenly, like someone had hacked at them without care. My chest tightened, but I forced myself forward. I knocked on the door. The elderly woman, Isolde, opened it. She recognized me instantly, her expression shifting from surprise to concern. "Silas, you're back," she said softly. "Please, come in." Her husband, Dorian, sat in the living room with a folded newspaper. His eyes flicked to me, guarded but sympathetic. "What's going on, son? Last time you were here you seemed unsettled." I took a breath, steadying myself. "Isolde, Dorian, I need to ask you something difficult. I believe my parents forged my signature to sell this house. I need to see the documents you were given." The couple exchanged a troubled look. Isolde hesitated, then disappeared into a side room. She returned with a stack of papers held tightly in her hands. "We don't want any trouble," she whispered. "But if what you're saying is true, then we may have been victims too." She handed me the stack, the smoking gun. I spread the papers out on their coffee table, my heart hammering. There it was. The deed of transfer with my name scribbled at the bottom. A notarized document confirming the sale. And receipts showing the house had been paid for in cash. I stared at the signature. My name was there, written in shaky, uneven strokes. Close enough to look convincing, but I knew my own handwriting better than anyone. "That's not mine," I whispered, my throat dry. Dorian frowned, tapping the paper. "They even had it notarized. Everything looked official to us. We had no reason to suspect otherwise. But something about the notary's signature bothered me. It was messy. Unprofessional. Almost like a lazy scrawl. I pulled out my phone. "Do you mind if I take photos of these?" "Go ahead," Isolde said, though her voice was tight with worry. "If you're telling the truth, we deserve to know what really happened." Click. 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 Each photo felt like a dagger and a lifeline at the same time, breaking into the past. Later that week, I made the hardest decision of my life. I went back to my parents' house. Not to talk, not to argue, but to dig. I knew their routine. They went grocery shopping on Saturday mornings. That gave me a narrow window. When I slipped inside, the air was heavy with memories I didn't want. Family dinners, birthdays, laughter that now felt fake. I pushed it all down and went straight for the file cabinet in the study. My hands trembled as I rifled through folders, bills, insurance papers, old tax returns. Then I saw it. A folder labeled in my mother's neat handwriting. Silas's residence. My stomach twisted as I opened it. Inside were copies of the same documents I'd photographed at Isolde's house. But this time, there were also handwritten notes in my mother's handwriting. All cash offer. Quick and clean. Quick and clean. Numbers. Dates. Little reminders scratched in pen. And then the notarized paper again. But this time, I caught it. The supposed notary's name was John H. Thompson. Something about it felt wrong. Too generic. Too convenient. I took photos of everything, careful to put it all back exactly as I found it. My hands shook as I closed the cabinet. I felt dirty, like a thief in my own childhood home. But the truth was more important than my guilt. The link to Cassian. That night, I scrolled through Cassian's Instagram again, sifting through his endless stream of luxury photos. The Maldives. The SUV. The dinners. And then I saw it. One photo showed him standing in front of a glass building. Behind him, on the wall, was the faint logo of a local real estate agency. I zoomed in until the pixels blurred, but there was no mistaking it. Cassian had been at the agency that handled my house, going undercover. The next day, I walked into that real estate office pretending to be a potential buyer. I sat down with an agent, a young woman named Selena, and casually asked about listings. Then I shifted the conversation. Actually, I was curious about a property I heard sold recently. A craftsman home on Oak Street. Selena's face brightened in recognition. "Oh yes, that one. Quick deal. The seller was, let me check, Silus Rowan. He said his brother was moving abroad and needed to sell fast. We found a cash buyer almost immediately. My pulse thundered in my ears, but I kept my face neutral. Cassian handled everything himself? She nodded. Yes, he brought all the paperwork, including the signature and the notarized documents. Everything was in order. Head for the right. I thanked her politely, left, and the moment I hit the sidewalk, my knees nearly buckled. Cassian hadn't just benefited from the sale, he orchestrated it. The betrayal. Complete. Piece by piece the puzzle was falling into place. My mother had forged my signature, my father had handled the fake notarization, and Cassian had facilitated the sale, spinning lies about me moving abroad. It wasn't just carelessness, it wasn't just desperation, it was a coordinated plan. They hadn't just betrayed me, they had conspired against me. When I walked back into my temporary rental that night, I spread the evidence across the table like a detective in one of those crime dramas. Photos of the deed, the shaky forged signature, the fake notarization with John H. Thompson's name, my mother's handwritten notes. All cash offer. Quick and clean. And now, Selena's confirmation from the real estate agency that Cassian himself had handled the sale. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was undeniable. My parents hadn't simply let Cassian run wild, they had joined him. Each one had played a part in tearing away the one thing I had built for myself. The rage that burned in me was like fire, but beneath it was something colder, heavier. Resolve. It was time to go back to Mr. Lysander, laying it all out. His office smelled of polished wood and dust when I stepped inside again. He rose to greet me, his calm presence a sharp contrast to the storm raging inside me. Well? He asked, settling back into his chair. Did you find anything? Wordlessly, I placed the evidence on his desk one piece at a time. Photos of the deed, the fake signature, the notary's name, the agency connection to Cassian. Mr. Lysander's sharp eyes scanned each page carefully, his fingers drumming softly on the table. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush, he simply absorbed. Finally, he looked up. His expression was grim but steady. Silas, this is strong. Very strong. A forged signature and a false notarization are serious violations, and combined with Cassian's direct involvement, we have grounds to move forward. I swallowed hard. You mean lawsuit? He nodded. A lawsuit to void the sale and reclaim the property. And once we file, the forfeiture clause in the trust will trigger automatically. Your parents and brother will lose every cent of their inheritance. The words hit me like a hammer. I had wanted justice. Now it was right in front of me. But justice also meant devastation for my family. The weight of family. I slumped back in my chair, running a hand over my face. Mr. Lysander, this isn't just business. This is my family. My mom, my dad. As twisted as it is, my voice cracked, but I forced the words out. I still love them. Part of me does. He nodded, his gaze softening. I understand. But Silas, remember this. They chose this path. They could have come to you. They could have asked. Instead, they stole. They lied. They betrayed. And now, they must face the consequences. I thought of my grandfather again. His voice in my head. Your strength is your true asset. Strength wasn't just working 3 jobs in college. It wasn't just saving every penny to buy a house. It wasn't just surviving being overlooked by my parents in favor of Cassian. Strength was this standing up to betrayal, even when it came from the people who shared my blood. I clenched my jaw, nodded once, and said, do it. File the case. The next step. Mr. Lysander leaned forward. Before we file, we'll need as much supporting evidence as possible. We'll want the original deed of transfer, confirmation that the notary, John H. Thompson, does not exist, a statement from the buyers, Isolde and Dorian, about how your parents presented the sale, and any trace linking Cassian directly to the deal. I exhaled slowly. I already have most of that. Good, he said with a firm nod. Then we're ready. But then he paused, his tone shifting. One more thing. You need to decide how you want this to unfold. Quietly, through the courts, or publicly, with your family present when they learn the full consequences. I blinked. Publicly? He folded his hands. You have extended family, don't you? Aunts, uncles, cousins? People who have always believed Cassian was the golden boy? If you reveal the truth in front of them, it will shatter the image your parents built around him. It will make the consequences undeniable. White. Even sedmentum deathly to the latter. The thought twisted in my chest. A courtroom battle was one thing. But confronting them in front of the whole family? That was a scar that would never heal. And yet, a small, bitter part of me wanted exactly that. To strip away the lies, to show everyone who Cassian really was, and to make my parents face what they had done in front of those who once praised them. I thought of Aunt Callista, my mother's older sister, the only relative who had ever seen me. truly seen me. The only one who had told me, years ago, your grandfather would be proud of you. If I had her on my side, maybe this confrontation wouldn't just be vengeance, it would be truth. I looked up at Mr. Lysander. I want them exposed. Not just in court. In front of the family. Everyone needs to see what they did. The gathering. That night, I called Aunt Callista. When she picked up, her voice was warm, familiar. Silas? Oh honey, I'm glad to hear your voice. How are you? For a moment, I almost broke. I almost let myself fall apart. But I held strong. Aunt Callista, I need your help. I want to organize a family gathering. At your house, everyone, uncles, cousins, all of them. There was a pause. That sounds serious. Silas? Is something wrong? I closed my eyes. Yes. And it's time everyone knows the truth. They did not Dausov. Her silence lasted only a moment before she said, steady and sure, then I'll host it. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. The day of the family gathering crept up faster than I expected. Every morning leading up to it, I woke with a knot in my stomach, torn between dread and determination. For years, family dinners had been moments where I quietly sat, listening to my parents gush over Cassian while brushing aside my own accomplishments. This time would be different. This time, I wasn't just another guest at the table. I was the storm walking in through the door, the setup. Aunt Callista's home had always been the heart of family get-togethers. She had that natural warmth, that ability to make her house feel safe, no matter what storms raged outside. When I arrived early to help her set up, she studied me closely. Silas, she said, her eyes filled with quiet concern. You look different. Stronger. But heavier too. I gave her a faint smile, placing plates on the long wooden table. Today's important, Aunt Callista. I just hope you'll understand when the time comes. She nodded, squeezing my arm gently. I trust you. Your grandfather would too. Those words steadied me. The family arrives. One by one, relatives filled the house. Uncles, cousins, even some distant family friends. There was laughter, hugs, the clinking of glasses like any other reunion. But under it all, I felt the tension humming in my chest, waiting for the right moment to erupt. Then they came. My father, dressed in one of his new shirts, wearing that air of quiet authority he thought made him respectable. My mother, in a soft blue dress, her smile polite, but strained. And Cassian late as usual, strolling in with a cocky smirk and that same white linen shirt I had seen in his Maldives photos. Big bro, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. He slapped my shoulder like we were buddies. How's Europe? Don't be mad about the house thing. Life's too long to stay bitter. Not is well for the case croach. Not is. His grin was the same smug expression from Instagram, and for a moment, my hands twitched with the urge to wipe it off his face. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled back, cold, controlled. Yeah, Cassian, life's long. The gathering shifts. As dinner wound down, I felt my pulse quickening. The chatter around the table was loud, but inside my head it was silent, focused. I stood, holding a glass of wine, though I didn't drink from it. Thank you all for being here, I began, my voice carrying just enough weight to hush the room. I've just returned from 6 weeks in Europe, working on one of the biggest projects of my career. But tonight, I don't want to talk about work. Tonight, I need to talk about family. About trust. About betrayal. The room fell silent. My mother's smile faltered. My father's jaw tightened. Cassian leaned back, smirking, thinking I was about to apologize. He had no idea. The evidence. I set the glass down and reached into my bag, pulling out the stack of documents I had gathered. The room watched as I laid them out on the table one by one. This, I said, holding up the deed of transfer, is the paperwork for my craftsman home, the house I poured my sweat, my time, my love into. The house I asked my parents to protect while I was away. Happen see. I paused, my eyes sweeping the room. This is my signature on the document. Except, it's not mine. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cousins exchanged wide-eyed glances. Aunt Callista pressed a hand to her mouth. I laid down the next page. This is a notarization signed by a man named John H. Thompson. But there is no John H. Thompson in the California Notary Registry. This signature is fake. And finally, I pulled out my phone, showing the photo of Cassian standing in front of the real estate agency. And this proof that my brother facilitated the sale, lying that I was moving abroad, rushing the deal through for cash. The room buzzed with whispers, shock vibrating through every corner. The truth revealed. Cassian's smirk vanished. He laughed nervously, shaking his head. What are you talking about, Silas? You're making this into something it's not. Don't blow this out of proportion. But before I could respond, I gestured to the far end of the table. Mr. Lysander, calm and composed, rose to his feet. "I am the attorney overseeing the Thaddeus Rowan Trust," he announced, his voice deep and steady. "And I can confirm what Silus is saying. The Craftsman House was purchased with trust funds, making it a trust asset. Selling it without the trustees' consent was not only illegal, it activated a specific clause. And he want to explain superior." Everyone leaned in, hanging on his words. "The forfeiture clause," he continued, "which states that any beneficiary who misappropriates, forges, or sells trust assets without consent, forfeits their entire inheritance. Effective immediately." The silence that followed was deafening. The fallout. My mother's face crumpled, her hands trembling as she whispered, "Silus, please. We didn't know about the clause. We only wanted to help Cassian. You can forgive us, can't you? You can share the inheritance like it was meant to be." My father's face had gone pale, his voice harsh but desperate. "We're family, son. Don't do this. Think of what you're taking away." And Cassian slammed his fist against the table, his face twisted in panic. "What? Grandpa had that much money and you kept it secret? You selfish bastard. You knew and you let me suffer while you kept it all to yourself." I stared at him, cold and steady. "Selfish? Cassian, I worked my entire life to prove myself worthy of Grandpa's trust. You've done nothing but take. And now you've taken too far. You've stripped yourself of everything." The room was heavy with shock, the truth crashing down on every face. The final words. My mother sobbed openly now, clutching my hand. My father looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Cassian stormed out of the backyard, muttering curses under his breath. I stood there, shaking but unbroken, my voice cutting through the silence. "You're not my family. Not anymore. Family doesn't steal each other's dreams." The words landed like a gavel. Aunt Callista came to my side, her hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Silus," she whispered. "Your grandfather would be proud." And for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something beyond anger or grief. A spark of peace, small but real. The days after the family gathering felt like walking through the eye of a hurricane. Everything was strangely calm on the outside. But inside me, I knew the storm hadn't ended. It had only changed direction. My parents stopped calling for a while. Cassian vanished from social media, deleting posts, shutting down accounts. But silence doesn't mean safety. Silence usually means people are scrambling, trying to cover their tracks. And this time, they were too late. The police get involved. One morning, my phone buzzed. It was Mr. Lysander. His voice was low but steady. "Silus, I have news. The police have opened a criminal investigation." I froze in my apartment, the words heavy in the air. Criminal? Yes. Forgery. Fraud. Misappropriation of trust assets. Your parents and Cassian will be summoned for questioning. I sat down slowly, gripping the edge of the table. It was one thing to expose them in front of the family, but hearing the words forgery and fraud attached to my parents, it was like a knife twisting in my chest. The interview. At the police station, I sat across from a middle-aged officer with a stern face and calm eyes. He listened as I walked him through everything: my work trip, the Instagram posts, the fake notarization, the elderly couple who'd unknowingly bought my house. He took detailed notes, his pen scratching steadily across the page. Finally, he looked up. "We've already checked the notarization records. The notary listed, John H. Thompson, doesn't exist. And a handwriting analysis confirms that the signature on the deed of transfer was forged." The words hit me like thunder. "What does that mean?" I asked quietly. "It means," the officer said, his tone firm but measured, "your parents will face charges of forgery and fraud. Cassian will be charged with complicity, profiting from criminal proceeds." My chest tightened. My parents. Criminals. My brother. Exposed. Justice was coming, but it felt bitter, not sweet. The punishments began. Weeks turned into months, the investigation moving faster than I expected. My parents were sentenced to 3 years probation and ordered to pay heavy restitution, the exact proceeds from selling my house. They had to mortgage the old Pasadena home I grew up in just to cover part of the debt. Cassian suffered the hardest blow. He was ordered to repay every cent he spent from the sale, including the Maldives trip, the SUV, and the luxury dinners. Over $20,000 gone in an instant. For the first time in his life, he couldn't run back to mom and dad for help. Their safety net was gone. The fall of Cassian. I'll never forget the day I saw him again. Months later, I was walking downtown near a coffee shop when I spotted him. He wasn't the golden boy anymore. No linen shirt, no smug grin. Just a tattered t-shirt, messy hair, and tired eyes glued to his phone as he muttered about job applications. He looked up, and for a brief moment, our eyes met. But instead of coming over, instead of saying anything, he turned away, ashamed. I didn't stop either. What was left to say? The house returns. 5 months after the trial, Mr. Lysander called again. His voice was steady, but almost relieved. Silas, the court has voided the sale. The elderly couple has been reimbursed. The Craftsman house is yours again. When he handed me the keys, my hands trembled. I drove straight there. The stained glass windows still glimmered in the sunlight. But the rose garden was wilted. The once vibrant petals faded. Inside, the familiar smell of wood greeted me. But the air was heavier. Scarred. Like me. I spent days cleaning, repainting, restoring. But no matter how much I scrubbed, I couldn't erase the memory that this house had once been stolen from me by the people who were supposed to love me most. It was mine again, but it didn't feel the same. The first night I slept back inside my Craftsman home, I lay awake staring at the ceiling beams. Every creak of the wood reminded me of the past, of the laughter I'd once imagined filling these rooms, of the betrayal that had nearly destroyed me, of the emptiness that lingered, even after winning it back. It felt less like a victory and more like standing among ruins after a war. Yes, the house was mine again. But the cost? My family, my trust, my sense of belonging, the garden of ghosts. In the backyard, the rose bushes had withered into brittle stems. I crouched down, running my fingers over the dry soil. This garden had been for my grandmother, a living memory of her love for roses. Now it looked like a graveyard. But as I stood there with the watering can, I realized maybe it was fitting. Just like the roses, I'd been neglected, cut down by betrayal. But I was still here, and if I could stand back up, maybe the roses could too. That afternoon, I cleared weeds, loosened the soil, and poured water into the earth. My hands were blistered, but I felt something stir inside me. The faintest flicker of hope. Letters from the past. A week later, I found a letter slipped into my mailbox. My mother's handwriting shaky, uneven. Silas, I'm sorry. I just wanted to help Cassian, but I see now how wrong I was. If you can forgive me, I'll do anything. There's a present in eyes ring that it ready nied. There a never was around. Was a ready dog. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at those words for a long time. Part of me wanted to crumple the letter, to burn it, to erase any sign of her voice. Another part wanted to believe her. But forgiveness isn't something you can force. Not when the wound is still bleeding. I folded the letter and left it on the table. Days passed, and I still couldn't bring myself to answer. The weight of inheritance. As the months moved forward, my 35th birthday drew near. And with it, the final unlocking of my grandfather's trust. Because my parents and Cassian had forfeited their inheritance, what remained would all come to me. $1.5 million, plus the Big Bear vacation cabin. But instead of excitement, I felt an emptiness. What good was money when the people you'd once called family were gone? That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of cold coffee, staring out at the faint green shoots pushing up in the rose garden. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind. Your strength is your true asset. Money, houses, cars, they're just tools. But your will, Silas, that's something no one can take away. Maybe the inheritance wasn't meant for me to hoard. Maybe it was meant for me to build something greater, a new purpose. That was the night the idea was born. The Thaddeus Rowan Foundation, a scholarship fund for young people who, like me at 19, worked hard, saved every dime, and dreamed of something bigger but lacked the safety net. Cassian had abused all his life. I wanted to turn betrayal into opportunity, scars into seeds. When I signed the paperwork with Mr. Lysander, his eyes softened, and for a moment, he looked almost proud. Your grandfather would be smiling right now, he said, and for the first time since all of this began, I believed it. The legacy lives on. Soon after, local papers picked up the story. Marketing consultant creates scholarship to honor grandfather. Headlines called me, the man who turned betrayal into hope. This note of life déplaisance for side. I didn't care about the spotlight. What mattered were the letters that began arriving in my mailbox. One girl wrote, "Thank you, Silas. Because of your scholarship, I can continue my studies and become a doctor." I read that line over and over, tears stinging my eyes. For the first time, the pain of losing my family began to feel worth it. Because from their betrayal, I had built something that could outlast me. The roses bloom again. Months later, on a bright Pasadena morning, I stepped into the backyard and stopped in my tracks. The roses, once wilted and gray, were blooming again. Vibrant, red, alive. I stood there in silence, the sunlight warming my face, the scent of roses drifting through the air. This garden had been my grandmother's memory. This house had been my dream. And now, both were symbols of something stronger. Survival. No matter what had been taken, no matter who had betrayed me, I had rebuilt, and just like the roses, I was blooming again. I used to think justice would feel like triumph, like standing on a mountaintop, looking down at all those who doubted me, proving I was stronger than they ever imagined. But when the dust settled, justice felt quiet, heavy, like carrying a crown made of iron. Yes, I had my house back. Yes, the trust fund was secure. Yes, my family had been held accountable. But victory didn't erase the hollow space left in my chest. The family that was. My parents tried reaching out. Voicemails, short messages, letters. My father's tone was stern at first, half defensive, half demanding, but softened with each attempt, until his voice was barely more than a whisper on the answering machine. Silas, we're sorry. We made a mistake. Please, don't shut us out forever. My mother's letters were worse. Each one carried the weight of her guilt, scribbled in shaky handwriting. I thought I was protecting your brother. I didn't realize I was destroying you. Cassian never called. Word spread that he had drifted to another city, picking up odd jobs, living small, unrecognizable from the golden boy my parents once worshipped. A part of me pitied him, another part, the larger part, knew he had chosen his path. I wasn't sure if I'd ever forgive them. Maybe one day. But forgiveness can't be rushed. The weight of betrayal. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit on the porch with my grandfather's old photo propped against the railing. His steady gaze, his knowing smile, it reminded me that he had seen this all coming, in some way. That's why he built the trust with such strict clauses. That's why he always told me, your strength is your greatest asset. Because he knew. He knew the world, and sometimes even family would test me in ways that would break most people. But he believed I wouldn't break. And maybe, just maybe, he was right. The legacy forward. The Silus Rowan Foundation grew faster than I imagined. Each semester, new students received scholarships. Each thank you letter reminded me that out of betrayal, something beautiful had been born. Every time I read their words, I felt less like a victim, and more like a bridge connecting my grandfather's legacy to futures he'd never get to see. It didn't erase the pain, but it gave the pain meaning. The final bloom. One quiet afternoon, I walked to the backyard, coffee mug in hand. The roses were in full bloom now, lush, red, radiant. I crouched down, touching one of the blossoms lightly, almost afraid it would disappear. The air was warm, the petals soft, and for the first time, I didn't think of betrayal. I thought of resilience. This house had once symbolized my dream. Now it symbolized my will. And those roses? They weren't just for my grandmother anymore. They were for me. Proof that even when everything is cut down, life can bloom again. Closing words. So, if you're listening to this, wondering what happens when the people you trust most turn their backs on you, remember this. You cannot control betrayal. You cannot stop people from choosing selfishness, but you can choose what happens next. You can rebuild. You can grow stronger. And like the roses in my garden, you can bloom again, more vibrant than ever. Because strength, as my grandfather said, is the one thing no one can ever take from you. Even after justice was served and the roses had begun to bloom again, the past still lingered like a shadow in the corners of my house. Every creak of the floorboards reminded me of nights spent sanding, polishing, repairing, working with my own two hands to build something no one believed in but me. And every time I walked through the hallway, I saw ghosts. Not literal ghosts, but echoes of my family. My mother's laugh as she dismissed the old walls. My father's muttered comments about it being a waste of money. Cassian's mocking voice, calling it a chicken coop instead of a home. They had once been background noise I could shrug off. Now, they were scars carved into the wood itself. The empty phone. Some nights, I'd sit at the kitchen table, my phone buzzing with notifications from colleagues, scholarship applicants, or well-wishers. But I'd stare at the empty space in my call log where Mom, Dad, or even Cassian used to appear. I hadn't deleted their numbers. A part of me couldn't. But the silence spoke louder than any call ever could. It was strange. I had spent so much of my life craving their approval, their recognition. Now, I didn't want their words, I wanted their absence. Because their absence meant peace. And yet, the silence still hurt. The old neighborhood. One weekend, I drove past my parents' old house, the one with the white picket fence, the minivan out front, the smell of barbecues in the summer. But it wasn't theirs anymore. They'd mortgaged it to pay restitution, and now another family lived there. A little girl chased a dog across the lawn, laughter ringing out. For a moment, I smiled. That house had been the stage for my family's favoritism, the silent witness to every time Cassian was praised, and I was ignored. And now, it belonged to strangers, innocent people. A fresh start. Maybe some ghosts deserved to stay buried. Cassian's echo. Through distant relatives, I occasionally heard whispers about Cassian. He was struggling. Job after job. Never lasting long. Friends drifting away. Debt mounting. I should have felt vindicated. And part of me did. But another part, the part still shaped by being his older brother, felt something else. Pity. Because Cassian wasn't just lazy. He was trapped. Trapped in the illusion that the world owed him something. Trapped in the comfort our parents gave him, until there was nothing left to give. I didn't excuse him. I couldn't. But I understood him in a way I never had before, and that understanding made the silence between us even heavier. My grandfather's portrait. One night, I placed my grandfather's old portrait above the fireplace. His strong hands, weathered from years of construction work, his eyes sharp but kind. I sat there, staring up at him. "Grandpa," I whispered, "I did it. I fought back. I stood my ground. But it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like survival." And in the quiet of that room, I almost heard his voice again. "Survival is victory, Silus. Because only the living can keep building." Halfway to the foundation's first student. That same week, I received a letter from the very first student who'd been accepted into the Silus Rowan Foundation. She wrote, "Mr. Rowan, I grew up in a home where nobody believed in me. Your scholarship isn't just money, it's proof that someone thinks I'm worth something. Thank you." I read those lines over and over, and suddenly, the weight in my chest lifted, because maybe that was my real family now. Not the ones who betrayed me, but the ones I chose to help, the ones who would carry my grandfather's legacy forward. And as I folded the letter carefully, setting it beside my grandfather's portrait, I realized something. The shadows of the past would always remain. But shadows don't exist without light. And I was finally learning to live in the light. For most of my life, Cassian had been untouchable. The golden boy. The favorite. The one who always had an excuse made for him. A safety net beneath him. A shield around him. But when that shield shattered, when the trust fund was stripped away, when our parents lost their home, Cassian finally stood in the open air. Vulnerable. Exposed. And the world was not kind to him. The first sight. I'll never forget the first time I saw him after the sentencing. I was walking through downtown Pasadena, past a crowded coffee shop, when I spotted him by the window. His once bright shirts and expensive watches were gone. Instead, he wore a faded t-shirt. Hair unkempt. Eyes hollow. A laptop sat in front of him. Tabs open to job applications. He was muttering into his phone, voice tight with frustration. For a moment, I hesitated. Should I go in? Should I offer a word? But then he looked up and our eyes met. What I saw wasn't anger. It wasn't even pride. It was shame. Pure, heavy shame. And in that instant, Cassian turned his head away, as if pretending I wasn't there. So I kept walking. Because sometimes silence says more than words ever could. The stories that reached me. Months later, whispers began reaching me through distant relatives and old family friends. Cassian was moving from place to place. A rental here, a couch there. Jobs came and went like smoke in the wind, bartending, retail, delivery, but nothing lasted. He owed money everywhere. Friends he once bragged to had cut ties. Even his girlfriend from the Maldives trip was gone, leaving him to face the mess alone. And slowly, the golden boy faded into just another man struggling to survive. A strange sympathy. You'd think I'd feel satisfied. That I'd laugh at the irony, seeing him finally face the consequences of a life built on excuses. But the truth? I felt sorry for him. Because Cassian wasn't just entitled. He was conditioned. Raised in a bubble where consequences didn't exist. Where effort wasn't necessary. Where love was given freely, no matter how much he failed. It wasn't that he couldn't grow, it was that he never had to, until now. The missed meeting. There was one night, months later, when fate nearly pushed us together again. I had just finished a late meeting for the foundation when I stopped by a 24-hour diner. And there he was, sitting alone at a booth near the back. A half-eaten plate of fries sat between his hands, his face buried in his palms. For a long moment, I just stood there at the door. I imagined walking over, sliding into the booth saying, "Cassian, it doesn't have to end like this." But then I remembered the Maldives. The SUV. The forged papers. The smirk on his face when he thought he'd won, and I walked out, not because I hated him, but because some lessons can't be taught by others. They can only be learned in the fire. The golden boy no more. From that night on, Cassian disappeared from my radar completely. No more whispers, no more sightings, just absence. Maybe he found steady work in another city. Maybe he sank deeper into debt. Maybe he finally learned how to stand without the safety nets he once took for granted. I don't know. And for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't need to know, because Cassian was no longer my responsibility. He was no longer the shadow looming over me. He was just another man, living his own choices. The golden boy had fallen, and whether he stayed down or learned to rise, that was his story, not mine. And that's where my story leaves me. I came back from Europe expecting to walk into my dream home, only to find betrayal waiting at the door. I lost not just bricks and wood, but trust, family, and the illusion that love was unconditional. But here's what I learned. Betrayal does not define you. What defines you is what you choose to build from the ashes. I rebuilt my home. I rebuilt my purpose. I even rebuilt my grandfather's legacy into something that will outlast me, the foundation that gives others a chance I almost never had. Yes, my parents lost everything. Yes, my brother fell from his pedestal. And yes, I carry scars that may never heal. But I also carry strength. The kind my grandfather always spoke about. The kind no betrayal can steal. So, if you take anything from my story, let it be this. People may try to cut you down, even the ones you trust most. But like the roses in my garden, you can bloom again. Stronger, brighter, unstoppable. Because justice may cost you everything, but in the end, truth will always bloom. Outro for YouTube. If you made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share this with someone who needs a reminder that no matter how dark things get, there's always a way to rebuild. And now, I'll leave you with this thought. What would you do if the very people you trusted most were the ones who betrayed you? Before betrayal, before the house, before Europe and trust funds and lawsuits, there was a boy. A boy who grew up in a small Pasadena home with peeling paint, a second-hand couch, and a family that seemed ordinary on the outside but fractured on the inside. That boy was me. The early divide. I noticed it early, even before I could name it. The way my mother's eyes lit up for Cassian, but only flickered for me. The way my father's voice softened when Cassian failed, but sharpened when I made even the smallest mistake. Cassian's laughter filled the living room. Mine echoed in silence. It wasn't that they hated me. No. They loved me but not equally. And when you're a child, unequal love feels like no love at all. The porch with Grandpa. But I had one refuge. The porch. Every weekend, Grandpa Thaddeus would sit out there, hands scarred and strong from decades of construction work. He'd light his old pipe, lean back, and say, "Silas, the world's a tough place. But you're tougher. Thank you for watching." And cast to get a friend's divide taste. I didn't always believe him. But his words became anchors in a stormy sea. He told me stories of building roads with nothing but grit and determination. Of losing jobs, losing money, but never losing will. And then he'd look me straight in the eye and say, "Strength, Silas. That's the only thing no one can steal from you." At the time, I thought he was just trying to cheer me up. Years later, I realized he was preparing me for the battle I didn't yet know I'd face. The rose garden's first seed. One summer, when I was around 12, my grandmother had me plant roses with her in the backyard. She showed me how to dig just deep enough, how to press the soil gently, how to water without drowning the roots. I remember asking, "Why roses?" She smiled, wiping dirt from her hands. "Because roses remind us that beauty comes with thorns. They teach you that life will prick you, but you can still grow something worth admiring." I didn't know then how much those words would matter. When she passed, I carried that memory like a seed inside me. Years later, when I planted roses at my craftsman home, it wasn't just for her, it was for me, for the boy who learned that beauty and pain always grow together. The trust I never expected. When Grandpa left me the trust fund, I was stunned. Cassian cried. My parents argued. But I sat in silence. Because it wasn't about the money. It was about belief. For the first time in my life, someone had said without words, "I see you. I believe in you. I trust you." And maybe that's why, even when my family betrayed me, I couldn't let myself break. Because Grandpa's trust wasn't just financial, it was spiritual. It was proof that I mattered. Looking back now, when I stand in my rose garden, I see more than flowers. I see a boy sitting on a porch, listening to his grandfather's gravelly voice. I see a grandmother teaching patience with soil and sunlight. I see roots. And maybe that's the real lesson. Betrayal cuts deep, yes. But roots, true roots, go deeper. And no matter how many storms come, roots hold you steady. Before my name was tied to betrayal, before Cassian became the golden boy, there was his name, the name that carried weight in our family. Thaddeus Rowan, my grandfather, my rock, my guide long after he was gone. A childhood in hardship. Thaddeus didn't grow up with trust funds or white picket fences. He grew up with calloused hands, hand-me-down shoes, and hunger gnawing at him more often than not. Born in a small working-class town, he was the eldest of 6. By the age of 12, he was already laying bricks, hauling lumber, and fixing roofs. Anything to keep food on the table. He used to tell me, "Silas, You learn young that life won't hand you anything. If you want it, you build it. And that's what he did. The rise of a builder. In his 20s, Grandpa joined a construction crew. He started as the man who carried cement buckets up ladders, but he watched, listened, and learned. By 30, he could read blueprints better than some engineers. He saved every dime, never wasting on luxuries. Instead, he invested in tools, in learning, in building relationships. Soon, he wasn't just a laborer. He was the man crews relied on to solve impossible problems. A collapsing beam? Thaddeus knew how to brace it. A storm delaying the project? Thaddeus rallied the men to work double shifts and still meet the deadline. His reputation wasn't just built on strength. It was built on will, love, and roses. It was at a job site that he met my grandmother, Marigold. She was delivering lunches for her uncle's food stand, and Grandpa always said she had the brightest laugh he'd ever heard. He didn't have much, just dirt under his nails and a paycheck that barely covered rent. But he offered her what he did have: honesty, loyalty, and a vision for the future. She said yes. And together, they planted roses outside their first little home. He told me once, "Your grandmother loved roses because they're stubborn. They bloom even when the soil is harsh. Just like us." Those roses would later inspire the ones I planted in my own garden. The turning point. Grandpa never became a millionaire by trade. He wasn't flashy. He didn't wear suits. But he made steady money, invested wisely, and lived frugally. The turning point came when he inherited a small piece of land. Instead of selling it, he developed it himself: one house, then two, then a row of modest family homes. That land, that decision, became the seed of the trust fund. He built not just structures, but security. The philosophy he left me. Whenever I sat on that porch with him, he'd repeat the same lessons, drilled into me like nails into wood. Strength isn't in muscle, it's in willpower. Money is just a tool. Integrity is the foundation. Family isn't who shares your blood, it's who shares your values. At the time, I didn't understand. I thought he was just giving speeches. But when my parents betrayed me, when Cassian forged my name, when I nearly lost everything, his words came back, sharp and steady. Grandpa didn't just leave me a trust fund. He left me a blueprint. Why he chose me. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder why he trusted me with so much. Why not split it evenly from the start? Why not trust my parents too? I think the answer is simple. He saw. He saw the way I worked. The way I refused to quit. The way I carried myself, even when no one believed in me. And maybe, just maybe, he saw the betrayal coming before I ever did. The trust wasn't just money. It was protection. A wall he built from the grave, shielding me from the storm he knew my own family might become. The true inheritance. Now, when people ask me what I inherited from Silus Rowan, I don't say, $1 million trust fund. I say, his will. His philosophy. His roses. Because money fades. Houses crumble. But strength, the kind he passed down, lasts forever. When the dust settled after the lawsuits, after the court dates, after the betrayals, I sat alone in my craftsman home, staring at the rose garden. I had the house back. I had the inheritance secured. I had justice. But I also had emptiness. Because what good is victory if it only fills your hands and not your heart? The spark of an idea. It started with a single thought. Back when I was 19, scraping money together from 3 jobs just to pay tuition, I had wished for one thing: not wealth, not luxury, just a little help. A scholarship. A chance. I never got it. But maybe, just maybe, I could give it to someone else. That's when the idea was born. The Silus Rowan Foundation. A scholarship fund named after the man who taught me that strength outlasts money, the paperwork and the wait. Starting a foundation wasn't easy. It meant meetings with lawyers, accountants, advisors. It meant filling out stacks of forms, sitting through endless calls, and signing document after document until my hand ached. But unlike fighting my family in court, this paperwork had hope in it. Every time I signed my name, I imagined a student, tired, broke, but determined, opening a letter that said, "You've been chosen." And suddenly, the weight didn't feel heavy anymore. The first recipients. I'll never forget the day we awarded the first scholarships. We gathered in a small auditorium at a local community college. The room was filled with nervous energy, students fidgeting in their seats, parents clutching their children's hands, professors watching with pride. When I stepped up to the podium, I felt my grandfather with me. His strength, his gravelly voice, his lessons. I spoke about resilience, about roses blooming even with thorns, about how success isn't about avoiding hardship but about surviving it. And then I called out the names. One by one, students walked across the stage, eyes wide, hands trembling as they received their scholarships. Some cried. Some laughed. Some simply whispered, "Thank you." And in that moment, I realized I hadn't just rebuilt my house. I had rebuilt my purpose. The stories that followed. Months later, letters began arriving. One girl wrote, "Because of your scholarship, I don't have to drop out of nursing school. I'll be the first in my family to graduate." A young man said, "I used to think people like me didn't matter. But your foundation showed me that someone believes in us." I read those letters late at night, sometimes with tears blurring the words. Because they weren't just thanking me. They were thanking my grandfather, too. His legacy was alive, beating in the hearts of students who would go on to change the world, turning pain into purpose. My parents had sold my dream house. My brother had forged my name. Betrayal had broken me. But now, standing in front of a group of students whose futures had just been rewritten, I realized something profound. They hadn't destroyed me, they had redirected me. Because without that pain, I might never have built the foundation. Without betrayal, I might never have understood just how much strength mattered. And without losing everything, I might never have found the will to give back. The garden and the future. Today, when I water the roses in my backyard, I don't just see my grandmother's flowers. I see each scholarship recipient. Each dream that took root because of the foundation. And I know this is just the beginning. Because the Silus Rowan Foundation isn't just a tribute to the past. It's an investment in the future. And for the first time in a long time, the future looks bright. Justice had been served. The courts had spoken. The foundation had begun. But the one thing that lingered, the one shadow I couldn't escape, came not from Cassian, not from the legal system, but from my parents. The first voicemail. It started with a voicemail. I came home one evening to hear the robotic tone. "You have one new message." Then, my mother's voice filled the room, shaky and small. "Silus, it's me. I don't know what to say. I'm sorry. Please call me back." I didn't. I couldn't. Because how do you call back someone who sold your dreams for a car and a vacation? The handwritten letter. Weeks later, a letter arrived. The envelope was pale blue, her handwriting shaky, almost unreadable. I held it in my hands for hours before I opened it. Inside, the words bled with regret. "Silus, I was wrong. I thought I was helping your brother, but I only destroyed you. If I could undo it, I would. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I still love you." I read it 3 times. My hands trembled, my chest heavy. Did she love me? Maybe. But love without respect isn't love, it's control. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, unsure if I would ever look at it again. My father's silence. My father didn't write. But once, late at night, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered, and there was silence on the other end, except for breathing. I knew it was him. Finally, in a low, gravelly voice, he muttered, "I should have been stronger." Then the line went dead. Those 4 words echoed in my head for weeks. Stronger for who? For Cassian? For himself? Or for me? The son he never protected? The question of forgiveness. People often ask me, "Did you forgive them?" The truth is complicated. Forgiveness isn't a light switch you can flick on. It isn't a gift you hand out just because someone says sorry. Forgiveness is a bridge, and sometimes, the other side is too far away. I wasn't ready. Maybe I'm still not. Because forgiveness doesn't erase betrayal. It doesn't rebuild trust. It only releases you from carrying their weight. And for a long time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to release it. The burden I carried. Every time I passed my parents' old house, I imagined them inside, living smaller lives, weighed down by guilt. Part of me pitied them. Part of me hated them. And part of me wondered, was holding on to this anger hurting me more than it hurt them? Because anger is heavy. And I had carried it long enough. The rose garden's answer. One morning, I stepped into the backyard with coffee in hand. The roses had bloomed again, vibrant red against the morning sunday. I crouched down, touching the petals, remembering my grandmother's words, "Beauty always grows with thorns." And I realized something. I didn't have to cut the thorns to enjoy the roses. Maybe forgiveness worked the same way. Maybe I didn't need to erase the pain. Maybe I just had to live alongside it. Let it remind me, but not define me. Closing that chapter. So did I call my mother back? Did I respond to the letter? Not yet. But I stopped hating her. I stopped replaying my father's silence like a broken record. And for the first time, the anger lifted just enough for me to breathe freely again. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But freedom. For months, I hadn't seen him. No calls, no texts. No smug Instagram posts flaunting vacations or new cars. It was as if Cassian had vanished, and part of me preferred it that way. Until one rainy afternoon in downtown Pasadena, fate put him back in my path. The coffee shop encounter. I ducked into a small coffee shop to escape the drizzle. The place smelled of roasted beans and wet pavement. I ordered a black coffee, turned, and froze. There he was, Cassian. Not in white linen shirts, Not with sunglasses perched on his head like a celebrity. No, he was hunched in a corner booth, wearing a tattered hoodie, his hair unkempt, his face pale. His phone sat on the table, screen glowing with job listings. His fingers trembled as he scrolled, as if each rejection weighed heavier than the last. For the first time in my life, my brother looked small. The moment of hesitation. He hadn't seen me yet. I stood there, coffee burning in my hands, my heart warring with itself. Part of me wanted to walk out, pretend I hadn't seen him. Another part wanted to slam the cup down, remind him of every betrayal, every smirk, every lie. But then he looked up, our eyes met. And just like that, the years of arrogance drained from his face. All that remained was shame. His attempt at words. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Silas. The word cracked in his throat. I said nothing. Just stared. Finally, he whispered, almost to himself. I messed everything up. Thanks for watching. I could have unleashed fury right there. Could have reminded him that his mess had nearly cost me my entire life. My trust. My home. But instead, I just nodded once and turned toward the door. Why I walked away. Not out of cruelty. Not out of hate, but because there was nothing left to say. Cassian didn't need my anger. Life had already punished him more than I ever could. He had gone from being the golden boy, to a man no one could rely on, scrambling for jobs, stripped of money, cars, vacations, and parents to shield him. And maybe that was the only way he could finally learn. The aftermath. As I stepped back into the rain, I felt lighter. Not because I forgave him, not because we'd reconciled, but because I finally realized his downfall wasn't my burden. For so long, I had carried the weight of being the responsible one, the strong one, the one who fixed what Cassian broke. But now it was his turn to carry himself. The brother I once knew. I'd be lying if I said I felt nothing. There was pity, yes. A flicker of sadness for the boy he used to be, the brother who once shared comic books with me, who used to sneak cookies from the kitchen at midnight. But that boy was gone. And the man he became, well, he had built his own cage. All I could do was walk past it. A quiet closure. That day, I didn't slam doors. I didn't shout. I didn't seek revenge. I simply walked away. And in that quiet act, I found closure. Because sometimes, closure doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from realizing you don't need one anymore. When the lawsuits ended, when the foundation found its footing, when Cassian faded into the background and my parents into silence, I was left with a question that haunted me more than any courtroom ever did. What is family? The weight of blood. Growing up, I was told that family was blood. That no matter how flawed, no matter how unfair, they were mine, and I was theirs. But blood had betrayed me. Blood had forged my name, sold my house, and left me with scars deeper than any stranger could inflict. So if blood wasn't enough, then what was? The unexpected circle. I found the answer slowly. In places I hadn't thought to look. It was Orion, my best friend turned lawyer, who stood by me when I was drowning in legal jargon and grief, never once asking for anything in return. It was Aunt Callista, who lent me her home so I could confront the truth, and who whispered that my grandfather would be proud. It was the students, the first recipients of the Rowan Foundation, who sent me letters not out of obligation, but out of gratitude, sharing how their lives were changing because someone believed in them. Family, I realized, wasn't just about who shared my DNA. It was about who showed up. The craftsman home. Reborn. My house, once a symbol of betrayal, began to shift in my eyes. Yes, it bore scars, walls that reminded me of lies, bricks that echoed with loss, but it also became a gathering place. I invited friends, colleagues, even some of the scholarship students, to sit on the porch, to share meals, to plant new roses in the backyard. Slowly, laughter filled the halls again. Not the forced kind, not the conditional kind, but the kind that said, "Here, you are safe. Here, you belong." The choice I made. One evening, as the sun dipped behind Pasadena's hills, I stood in the garden holding a watering can. I thought of my parents, of their voicemails, their letters, their silence. I thought of Cassian hunched over in that coffee shop, and I asked myself, do I need them to heal? The answer was no. Healing didn't come from waiting for them to change. It came from choosing where to place my love, my loyalty, my energy, and I chose to place it where it grew. The new definition, family, I realized, isn't about obligation, it's about choice. It's the people who stand with you when the storm hits, the ones who water your roses when you can't, the ones who believe in your worth even when others try to sell it away. I had lost a family once, but I had built another, and in that choice, I found peace. Standing here now, years after that first betrayal, I see my story differently. It isn't just about a house. It isn't just about money, or a trust fund, or even betrayal. It's about survival. It's about strength. It's about what you do when the people you love the most cut the deepest wounds. The house was never just a house. When my parents sold my craftsman home, I thought I had lost everything. But a house isn't just wood and stone. It's memory. It's meaning. And meaning doesn't die just because someone signs it away. I rebuilt. I restored. And in the cracks of those old walls, I found proof of my own resilience. The roses keep blooming. The rose garden has always been my reminder. Once, it was about my grandmother's love. Later, it became a symbol of loss. But now? Now it represents rebirth. Every year, no matter how harsh the winter, those roses find a way to bloom again. And if roses can bloom through thorns, then so can I. So can you. On Betrayal and Justice. People ask me if I regret taking my family to court. The truth? No. Justice isn't about revenge, it's about balance. And in balancing the scales, I didn't just protect myself. I honored my grandfather's legacy, the trust he built, the lessons he left me. He once told me, "Your strength is your greatest asset." And he was right. Strength isn't measured in wealth or victories, it's measured in how you rise when others try to pull you down. Family. Redefine. Blood betrayed me, but love rebuilt me. My true family is not limited to those who share my DNA. It's built from friends who stood by me, mentors who believed in me, students whose futures I now get to support. Family is chosen. And I chose mine. The legacy I leave. One day, long after I'm gone, the Rowan Foundation will still be here helping kids who remind me of myself at 19, broke but determined, overlooked but burning with potential. And that, more than any house, more than any inheritance, is the legacy I want to leave behind. To you, listening now, if you take anything from my story, let it be this. You cannot always control betrayal. You cannot always prevent loss. But you can control how you rise from it. You can let it define you, or you can let it refine you. I chose the latter, and I hope, when your storm comes, you will too. Closing words. This is my story of loss, of betrayal, of justice, and of rebirth. And as I sit here, sipping coffee on the porch of my reclaimed home, watching the roses bloom again, I can finally say this: I didn't just survive, I grew. And so can you.